Data has a purity that people lack. It does not lie to get a promotion. It does not flatter to avoid conflict. It simply is. For 16 years, that was my sanctuary. I was Dr. Alani Vieri, a title I had earned through a decade of obsessive study into systems architecture and statistical analysis. At Health Corp, I was the head of vendor audit, a title that sounded profoundly boring to most people. To me, it was the front line in a quiet war against expensive, charming incompetence. My life's work was not a paper or a theory. It was a living thing, a machine for finding truth in noise. I called it Veritas. It was an AI-driven auditing platform that lived on a dedicated server in a climate-controlled room 3 floors below my office. Veritas was my legacy. It didn't just look at spreadsheets. It ingested everything. Terabytes of unstructured data, the slightly too long silences in customer service calls, the internal chat logs where undertrained agents asked each other basic questions, the billing codes that magically became more expensive when processed by the night shift. Veritas used sentiment analysis algorithms I'd patented myself to detect patient distress, even when the patient said everything was fine. It was beautiful. It was a mathematical reflection of reality. He had no idea what he was really trying to steal from me. He probably thought it was just my job. My apartment was the opposite of my professional life. It was a warm, humid oasis filled with the scent of damp soil and blooming flowers. I cultivated orchids, not the simple grocery store phalaenopsis, but the notoriously difficult, heartbreakingly stubborn ones. My prize, a Paphiopedilum rothschildianum, had sat inert in its pot for 12 years. 12 years of patient watering, feeding, and waiting. It was a testament to my core belief. If you create the perfect system and maintain it with absolute discipline, a spectacular and inevitable conclusion is guaranteed. After a long day of dealing with people, I would change out of my severe, tailored suit and into a faded, ridiculously soft sweatshirt from my doctoral alma mater. I would pour a small, precise measure of Amaro Nonino into a chilled glass. Its complex, bitter taste was the perfect antidote to the blandness of corporate platitudes. Then came Chase Caldwell. Chase was in his early 30s, but he had the unearned confidence of a much older man who had never once been told no. He was the son of the owner of OptiSource, the billing and customer service company we had outsourced half our operations to. He wore bespoke suits that were just a little too tight across the shoulders, as if to advertise the gym membership his father paid for. His watch cost more than my car. His success was an inheritance he wore like expensive cologne. You could smell it on him from 10 feet away. His core flaw was a profound contempt for substance. He genuinely believed that charm was a substitute for competence, that a confident smile could rewrite a contractual obligation. What he didn't understand was that data does not have a personality to be charmed. He would sit in my meetings, radiating a kind of lazy arrogance. While I presented meticulously compiled reports, he would scroll through his phone, only looking up to deploy a volley of corporate nonsense. "We need to look at this holistically," he'd say, after I showed him a chart detailing a 15% drop in first call resolution. "You're getting stuck in the granularity, Alani. Let's blue sky the big picture instead of getting bogged down in disruptive data points." He used words like ammunition, firing them without any understanding of their meaning. He once described his team of undertrained, underpaid call center agents as having operationalized a new synergy paradigm to maximize their client-facing value add. I think he meant they had learned to transfer calls more quickly. The personal insults started small. They always do. He consistently interrupted me. He insisted on calling me Allie in a tone that was both familiar and dismissive, a verbal pat on the head. His emails in response to my findings were masterpieces of passive-aggressive condescension. "Thanks for flagging, but I think you're missing the forest for the trees," was a common refrain. The breaking point, the moment my professional anger began to crystallize into something colder and harder, came during a quarterly review. I had sent him a chart showing a clear downward trend in patient satisfaction scores, backed by thousands of data points from Veritas. He stood up to present to my boss, a conflict-averse vice president named Marcus. When the slide came up, it was my chart, but it was wrong. He had crudely photoshopped the downward trending line to show a gentle upward curve. It was a child's forgery. He clicked to the slide, looked directly at me, and smiled. A slick, empty, triumphant smile. In that moment, he wasn't just faking data. He was mocking me. He was mocking the very concept of truth. That was when I knew he had to be destroyed. Professionally, of course. Veritas uncovered the smoking gun 2 weeks later. It wasn't one thing, it was a symphony of fraud. Systematic overbilling through upcoding routine inquiries, bots closing out trouble tickets without resolution, call logs showing patient calls being disconnected after exactly the minimum time required to bill for a consultation. It all added up to an estimated $20 million a year. A quiet, systematic theft hidden beneath a mountain of buzzwords. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus to present the final undeniable findings. I walked into the conference room and found him sitting beside a woman from Human Resources. Chase was not there. Marcus, a man whose spine seemed to have been surgically replaced with gelatin, refused to meet my eye. He mumbled. He shuffled papers. The HR representative, a woman with a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes, did most of the talking. They were terminating my position, effective immediately. Chase and his team feel your auditing process is creating a hostile partnership environment, Marcus finally managed, staring at a point on the wall just over my shoulder. We need someone who can smooth things over. The words hit me. They were Chase's words, the same empty phrases he had used in his official complaint. Friction, not agile, disruptive. They were not firing me for being wrong. They were firing me for being right, too loudly, for bringing a spreadsheet to a charm fight. My anger vanished, replaced by a sudden diamond-hard clarity. I looked at Marcus, this weak, frightened man, parroting the words of the snake who was robbing them blind, and I felt nothing but a cold, calculating calm. I had built this system with one hidden feature, a feature designed for precisely this kind of corporate cowardice. I simply nodded. I said, "I understand." I stood up, walked back to my office with the HR representative trailing me, and began to pack my things. My personal items fit into a single small box, a framed copy of my doctorate, a photo of my parents, a small, ugly ceramic bird my niece had made. I returned my laptop and my security badge. I didn't make a scene. I didn't fire off angry emails. I walked out of the Health Corp tower, got into my car, and drove home to my orchids. My inaction was my primary action. I opened the door to my apartment and was greeted by the familiar, humid warmth. I took off my severe, tailored suit jacket and let it fall onto a chair. I changed into my old sweatshirt. I went to the kitchen, took out the bottle of Amaro Nonino, and poured myself a glass. The bitter, complex liquid was a welcome shock to my system. I walked into my greenhouse room and looked at the rows of patient, silent orchids. My Paphiopedilum rothschildianum sat there, as it had for 12 years, a collection of green leaves, showing no sign of its spectacular potential. I smiled. I understood. What Chase and Marcus and all the other empty suits didn't understand was the nature of Veritas. They thought it was a piece of software the company owned. It was not. Veritas was my intellectual property. I owned the source code, the patents on its analytical algorithms, everything. Health Corp did not own it. They licensed it from me personally. It was a non-negotiable condition of my employment. Buried deep in a 200-page contract their legal team had glanced at years ago and forgotten. And buried deep within that licensing agreement was Clause 7, Section 4B. The monthly unfiltered Veritas integrity report shall be generated automatically on the first Monday of each calendar month at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and distributed simultaneously via encrypted email to the head of vendor audit and the confidential secure digital mailbox of the Board of Directors Internal Audit Committee. I had written that clause myself. It was my insurance policy against the very corporate cowardice that had just cost me my job. It was a dead man's switch. Even with me gone, the system would still perform its core function. It would tell the truth, and it would deliver that truth not to a weak middle manager like Marcus, but to the one body that could not legally ignore it, the board's audit committee. I trusted my system more than I trusted any human. The next monthly audit was scheduled to run automatically in 6 days. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't alert the press. I spent the next 6 days in quiet satisfaction. I repotted some of my orchids. I read a book on 16th century Italian poetry. I went for long walks. I slept soundly. Each evening I enjoyed my small glass of Amaro and thought about the elegant, unstoppable process I had set in motion years ago. I thought about the server in the climate-controlled room, silently waiting. I thought about the line of code that would execute without any human intervention. There was a clean, mathematical beauty to it. It was the calmest I had felt in months. On the 7th day, a Monday, I woke up at my usual time. I made coffee. At 8:59 a.m., I sat down at my personal laptop and opened my email client. I took a sip of coffee. The clock on my screen ticked over to 9 o'clock. A second later, a new email appeared in my inbox. The sender was Veritas Automated Reporting System. The subject was Vendor Integrity Report, OptiSource. Attached was a single PDF file, 50 pages long. I opened it. It was all there. The damning call logs, the falsified billing codes, the sentiment analysis scores showing unprecedented patient distress, and a new executive summary on the cover page, an addition I had programmed into the last update. It summarized the total estimated fraud in stark, undeniable language, $20,453,000 annually. I took another sip of coffee. Across town, in the hushed wood-paneled offices of the Health Corp Executive Suite, I knew another copy of that same email had just arrived. It landed in the secure, confidential digital mailbox of the board's audit committee. These were not men like Marcus. These were serious, powerful people, retired judges, former CEOs of other massive corporations, financial titans who detested two things above all else: scandal and financial loss. I imagined the scene. One of them, perhaps the committee chair, a notoriously sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, would open the PDF. There would be no spin. There would be no Chase Caldwell to flash a charming smile and talk about synergies. There would only be page after page of cold, hard, algorithmically verified proof that their company was being systematically defrauded, and proof that their own management team had just been manipulated into firing the one person who tried to stop it. I watched his world collapse in real time. From the quiet comfort of my own home, the system failure would be total. Marcus would be exposed as a fool. Their entire reliance on good relationships over good data would be laid bare as a catastrophic, multi-million-dollar mistake. The first tremor hit my phone 2 hours later. It was a text from a former colleague in the finance department. What the hell is going on? The entire board is on a warpath. I smiled and went to water my orchids. The call came the next day. The caller ID showed the main switchboard for Health Corp. I let it ring 4 times before answering. I put it on speakerphone, set it on my potting bench, and continued to mist the leaves of a delicate vanilla orchid. Alani Vieri. The voice on the other end was strained. It was the company's chief operating officer, a man named Henderson I had met twice. He sounded like he hadn't slept. Alani. Thank you for taking my call. He cleared his throat. We find ourselves in a complicated situation. Do you? I said, my voice calm and even. I snipped a dead leaf from the orchid. He stammered for a moment. Yes, we've received a report regarding OptiSource. It appears to have been generated by your system. It's not my system anymore, I said lightly. You made that clear last week. It's an automated platform operating under the terms of a licensing agreement. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear muffled voices. The look on his face when he realized the depth of his company's mistake must have been something to see. He had no power here. I was not his employee. I was a licenser whose contract they were, technically, still honoring. We need your help to understand this, he finally said, his voice stripped of its usual authority, to verify the data. The data is verified, I said. Veritas does not make mistakes. The report is 100% accurate. What you need is not verification. What you need is a solution. Another silence, longer this time. The desperation was palpable. They had a $20 million hole in their budget, a fraudulent contractor, and a board of directors demanding answers. They were humiliated and exposed, and they had fired the only person who knew what was going on. What do you propose? Henderson asked. His voice was a bare whisper. This was the moment, the climax of a plan years in the making. I looked around my greenhouse at the patient, thriving life I had cultivated. I was in my element. They were trapped in a boardroom, drowning in the consequences of their own weakness. First, I said, my voice crisp and clear, you will terminate your contract with OptiSource, effective immediately. Second, you will launch a lawsuit against them for fraud, breach of contract, and damages. My final report will serve as your Exhibit A. Third, you will need someone to clean up this mess, someone to audit the damage, oversee the transition, and vet a new trustworthy vendor. Yes, he said quickly. We'd be prepared to offer you your old position back, with a significant raise, of course. I laughed. It was a soft, cold sound. I'm not interested in my old position. I am no longer an employee you can fire on a whim. As of this morning, I am the founder and sole proprietor of Vieri Analytical Solutions. My new firm provides exactly the services you require. My consulting fee is 5 times my old salary, billed monthly, with a 12-month minimum contract. My terms are non-negotiable. The silence that followed was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of complete and total surrender. They had no choice. They had no leverage. They had fired their watchdog, and now they had to hire her back as a lion tamer at a lion's price. I will have my lawyer send over the contract this afternoon, I said, and hung up before he could respond. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The lawsuit against OptiSource made the financial news. The company was bankrupted. Chase Caldwell, the boy king whose charm was his only asset, was publicly disgraced. His name, the only thing he had ever truly owned, was now synonymous with corporate fraud. He became a case study in business schools, a footnote in textbooks about the importance of ethical oversight. His poetic downfall was delivered by the very data he had held in contempt. It was perfect. 6 months later, I was back in the Health Corp boardroom. It was the same room where Marcus had fired me, but this time I was at the head of the table. I was presenting my audit of 3 potential new vendors. I was the highest paid person in the room. The CEO and the COO and Eleanor Vance from the board all listened with rapt attention. My words had weight now. They had a price tag. At the far end of the long, polished table, sitting where the junior associates usually sat, was Marcus. He had been demoted but not fired. The board, in a rare moment of poetic cruelty, had kept him on as a living monument to the company's failure. His new title was something vague and humiliating. He was taking notes for me. I began my presentation. I made eye contact with the CEO, with the board members, with my new clients. I laid out the data with the same precision and clarity as always, and I never once looked at Marcus. I never acknowledged his presence. In my professional world, he no longer existed. My victory was not just in my new power or my new wealth. It was in his complete and utter irrelevance. That evening, I went home. As I walked into my greenhouse, a flash of color caught my eye. I stopped. After 12 years of patient, silent growth, my Paphiopedilum rothschildianum had bloomed. 2 spectacular, intricate, impossibly beautiful flowers. I smiled, poured myself a glass of Amaro, and toasted my victory. Some things are worth the wait.